Sup here. And today I want to talk to you about audio in Warzone. So specifically, I want to look at kind of what is going on with the audio. Why is it such a mess? And then in the next part of this three-part series, we're going to look at how do I fix the audio on console. And then lastly, we're going to look at PC audio, and we're going to break down the Art is War audio, the audio cheese, if you will, to understand what's going on. Because I think when you understand it from a technical standpoint, mixed with understanding what's going on with the audio, it's much easier to wrap your head around what is happening and how you can accomplish something similar on console. So with that being said, let's delve into kind of like what's going on with the audio in Warzone. Now, I'm going to try and do this with as little technical discussion as possible, because when it comes to all of the audio, visual, movie making, streaming, gaming, world, probably the nerdiest, like most technical aspect is actually the audio. Getting good audio in a game in movies, in a game, anything, is so technically demanding. Every aspect of it is just, it's math. It's understanding how the waves work, and doing all that work behind the scenes to kind of give us a good mix. Which whenever you talk to somebody who's good at audio and knows it really well, they get into these weeds very quickly. And because that's where the selling point is, right? Especially when you buy headsets and you buy equipment, right? They get into the details and into the technical side of it. And most people, I don't think, really have a grasp on what's going on with audio. And so when all of these things start getting manipulated and adjusted, a lot of people don't know what's going on. Like, they just pick one and pick something and go forward with it. So I want to talk about audio in as non-technical a way as possible, which probably is going to not work as well as I'd like, but we're going to try. So when we talk about audio, it's important to understand a couple of different things. So the first one is the mix. Basically, all the different sounds combined together into one basically file, right? So the earliest recorded audio would have been a record, right? And that track, right? The mix is what you get on the track, right? That the needle reads on the record. So, and then all the way now we have digital audio, where we have, audio boards. Professional audio boards can be like 8 feet long, and they have, you can adjust everything, to the finest degree. And so all of that together, like, when you look at what Call of Duty does in Warzone, is they take a lot of noise and they make a very complex sound profile, right? A very complex mix, and then they do it in surround sound, okay? And surround sound is basically, unlike your standard headphones, right, which is left channel, right channel, right? You have two ears, one for each ear. Surround sound uses multiple speakers to create different points that the sound will come from, right? So like if you go to a movie theater, right, there are speakers in the front, speakers next to you, speakers behind you, okay? And it allows the sound that they create, to kind of have directionality, right? So like when a plane flies overhead, you can hear it over there, and it flies over here, and I'll use this hand, it's over there and it flies by, right? And sure enough, you get that sense that it's gone past your head because you hear that it's gone that way. And so we're very familiar with this in the context of cinema, right? Of movies. But when you look at the context of video games, right, we've largely lived in a left channel, right channel world, right? In fact, the earliest game consoles, like the original Nintendo, was just one channel, right? You didn't get left or right. You just got the game. And so we've kind of grown into this world where generally it's a left channel, right channel stereo scenario, but they aren't making the game left channel, right channel anymore. Now they're making the game for surround sound. They're recording it that way. They're building their audio engines that way. And one of the things that they like to do is create intentional directionality in how the audio works in the game, which is where you run into one of the first problems, right? When you have a standard headset, right, with a left channel and right channel, how do you get 7 channels of noise into left channel, right channel? So a couple of different ways to do it, but most of the ways they do it is they reduce everything on one side to one channel, and everything on one side to the other. So you have 6 channels and somewhat of the center channel condensed into like the right channel, right? And when you do that, you're mixing signals that don't need to be there. And so sometimes, when they do it well, it kind of hides it. You don't really notice it as much. But in games like Warzone, where there's so much noise and there's so much sound, and you're trying to condense this directionality, it creates a muddled effect, right? Where there's noise overlapping noise, where in the proper mix, in a full surround environment, what you've got is sounds that should sound distant or farther from you sound like they're right on top of you, and sounds that you should be able to hear are buried under layers of other sounds that don't necessarily need to be in that same channel. So, the big one here is in Warzone is always footsteps, right? Like I can't hear footsteps because there's this thing exploding, or there's a jet flying over, or there's a crate next to me, right? And so a lot of times the mix they give us is kind of a mess, because they're trying to condense the surround sound experience into a dual left or right channel, and it doesn't really work that well. And so what you get is this kind of weird, messy, very loud game that has a lot of extraneous noises that seem to be louder than they should. And that creates, that helps create some of the problems that we deal with. And then the next part is called occlusion, right? So basically what occlusion is when sound travels through an object or bounces off of an object, it changes the way the sound sounds, right? So like I'm talking to you and I'm talking straight into this microphone, and if I take my phone or I take a device, right, and I pass it in front of my mouth when I talk, the device is going to occlude the sound. It's going to change the way the sound works, right? So in this case, I'm going to take my phone and I'm going to put it in front of my microphone. And you can clearly hear that the tone changes, right? So right now there's no phone in my way. I can talk clearly, but now it's occluded, right? So there's an obstruction, and it changes not just the volume, but the actual sound. It's more muddled. It's not very clear. And so Warzone, on top of having all of this audio from all these channels condensed into left and right, it has this audio occlusion going on, which is something that you do want in a game, right? Think of like Fortnite has good audio occlusion, right? You can hear if somebody sounds like they're inside of a building and you're outside of it, because it sounds muddled, the footsteps. And you can hear if they're running around in front of you, right? Because or outside the building, because it doesn't sound occluded, right? It doesn't sound muddled. So in Warzone, you get all this occlusion going on, right? And they have an entire engine, entire code base designed to create it and model what the sound should be doing when you make it, right? So like if you walk through a building, what kind of ground are you walking on? It creates a certain sound, and then that sound, when it bounces off of the walls next to you, what does that sound like? And what it goes through the wall to the person on the other side, what does it sound like to them? Okay, and so it's the same sound is being heard differently through this engine. And so one of the problems when you have on top of the sounds, on top of the surround sound condensing into one, you end up with a lot of sounds that kind of get emphasized because they hit these occlusion markers, or they get, they might get muddled, but it doesn't like deafen them, right? So like think of like an explosion, like a plane flying by. It almost creates like an echo, like a low bass echo that drowns out other noise, right? And it just kind of, it just becomes deafening. And that's an occlusion thing going on. And so, especially when you have stuff going on that's farther away than it should be to make that kind of noise, but it hits these occlusion items, right? It creates this extra noise that I don't think is intended, and it doesn't feel like it should be there. And they've mentioned before that they've tried to get rid of it, and they've tried to clean this up for us. But the reality is that it doesn't work. Like, it's not working very well, right? Like, so we have a lot of noise in the game, and it's not supposed to be there. I don't think a lot of it isn't supposed to be as obstructive as it is. You know, we should have some noise, right? Like, and it creates they want to create an ambience to this game, right? Unlike Fortnite, which, is just literally what you see is what you get. There's very little ambience going. There's nothing going on besides hunting players and building towers, right? But in Call of Duty, there's a lot of stuff going on in Warzone specifically. You have birds, and you have animals, and you have air conditioning units on top of buildings that hum, and you have rivers that flow and make a bubbly brook sound. And you just have all this stuff going on, and you have different surfaces that sound differently, and then there's planes that fly overhead and announcers and all this stuff. And it creates a very crowded mix where it doesn't feel like the way they've designed the game is intended to have all of this playing as loud as it is. And we've already discussed the surround issue, right? But there's another issue that comes up that also plays a part in how we experience the game, especially on console. But anybody with a PC that just plugs their headphones straight into the headphone jack, they're going to deal with this too. Okay, so it's not exclusive to console, and that is the equalization mix, right? Like the balance in it, and this is where kind of the marketing of headphone makers and headset makers comes in, because when you create a mix, right, it's got to be the same for everybody. Okay, the problem is every game that you have, or every headset that you have, it's going to be performed differently. So, like, I have this standard Xbox control headset, and it sounds different than this Razer headset, okay? And that they both sound different than this Walmart special Turtle Beach headset, which sounds different than the SteelSeries headset, okay? Which sounds different than the A40s I have, okay? And those sound different than the IEMs that I'm wearing. And because all of these different devices are built differently, they have different materials, different engineering, and they have their own equalizer kind of built in, programmed into them. So they create the sound in your ears different than any other headset. So every headset is actually different. Every model, even between brands, it has different profiles. It responds to different sounds and different tones uniquely compared to other models. And so as a player, right, when we go shopping for a new headset, when we're trying to solve the audio problem, we're trying to solve it with equipment by hunting down, this one has a better bass response, or this one has, better treble, dynamic range or something. And insert technical term here that they advertise to us and tell us it's better. The reality is none of them are good for Warzone because the mix is so busy and there's so much going on. And so we as players need to be able to fix that. They do give us some presets in our audio settings. There's stereo, there's speakers, there's headphones, there's home theater, right? And it adjusts different levels and different elements of the equalization mix for us in the game. But they're not matching it to what's going on with our equipment. And so we as players often have completely different experiences with the audio. Some people have headsets that just happen to work pretty well for Warzone for one reason or another. And they don't report the same kind of issues that somebody who might have an expensive SteelSeries that's just not tuned well to play Warzone noise. And that person just can't hear anything, right? They don't hear the footsteps. They don't hear things as well. It's too much bass. And so as players, one of the things that we have to deal with is not just the audio mix and not just the issues with the equipment, but like our perception of it, right? And so what we need to do is kind of step back and understand what's going on, right? So what's going on is we have this very complex surround sound system that's being dumbed down to a left and right channel for us. And then we're hearing that in an pre-equalized piece of equipment that's not tuned very well for the game, okay? So how do you fix this? How do you make it so it sounds better? And the answer is we have to use equalizing, okay? And we have to use spatial audio. We have to use surround sound, is what I mean by that, okay? And so for whatever reason, surround sound and equalization has just not become standard on consoles at all. But we're fortunate that it does exist on consoles. And what that means is that we have the ability to use our equipment that we have, our existing equipment, to the best of its ability to play this game. And that's what we should do, okay? We should be just like you would not play on a 720p 30 hertz television and expect to have as good of an experience as someone on a 4K 120 hertz monitor, right? You just should not expect the same level of quality of experience because somebody invested in the correct equipment. We've invested in the equipment, but we need to set it up properly, and that's what the next videos in this series are going to do. We're going to talk about how to set this up on console and how to take advantage of the aspects that are in the game versus the standard setup. And then we're going to look at what Art of War is doing on PC and show how that is basically the same thing, just with more granular details in PC. So that's what we got coming up. Thanks for listening. Hope you have a good one. Check out the next video in the series and then the next two videos, and I will catch you on those ones.